Thank you, Tracy. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, in the back. That's always the test, right? We always have to test the back. Look, thank you very much for coming tonight. I'm grateful for your attendance and participation. It's going to be awkward to hold this. It seems like I'm a rock star or something with this microphone up here. But I'll start off by just asking, has anyone ever heard of Abu Ghraib? Okay, great. This is because what you've heard, I'm probably going to tell you is a little different. So you might get some different insight on this, what I would call one of the biggest strategic blunders in the Iraq conflict or the Iraq war. But first, I want to do a couple things. One, I want to thank my wife, Dana, for coming tonight. She normally doesn't come to see me speak, but she's here, so thank you for coming. And my daughter, Elise. And we had some great news today, special news. My youngest daughter was actually accepted into the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City today. So we're super proud of her for that. And then lastly, I want to just introduce a really great friend of mine, Nick Nickel. Nick and I served together in the military. I'm grateful that he showed up tonight. This gentleman is a true hero and part of history. So if you get an opportunity at some point during the evening, please introduce yourself to Nick. And I'll just say one thing. Has anyone ever heard of an operation called Eagle Claw? Eagle Claw, raise your hand. It was the Iran hostage mission. Well, this gentleman was there. So if you get a chance later this evening, please stop by. And Nick, I'm offering you up to meet people. But thanks for coming. Okay, can we go to the, can we slip, we'll go to the next slide. Some of these are just preparatory slides to get into the conversation. Basically, in 2003, I was in a long-range surveillance unit. It's basically an infantry unit. It's not a special forces unit, but it's a unique unit with really special characteristics and types of soldiers that are put into this organization. And we were on the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003. And we went through the country, and we went through Baghdad, and we stopped in a place in the north side of Iraq called Balad. And there's an airfield there. I'm sort of orienting you to the map here a little bit. But there's an airfield there, and we stopped there, and about, 3 or 4 weeks in later, we were bored. And we were sitting around wondering when we were going to go home, because the conflict was over, the main conflict was over, and we were starting to run into summertime. And so it was, think about June, July of 2003. It was starting to get very hot, and we were ready. We were done, ready to go home. And then in August of 2003, the first IED. Has anyone ever heard of an IED? The first IED actually happens on MSR Tampa, which was a main highway, and one of the soldiers in our brigade was killed. And this was a change in what I would consider the dynamics of the conflict. So we went from major combat operations, which is really what you saw in the news, tanks and artillery and airplanes, to what we then ended up doing for the next 2 decades, which was counterinsurgency. And so it was an interesting sort of transition. And by the way, I went back later multiple times and then commanded a battalion, an 800-person battalion in 2010 in the southern part of Iraq. So I did a completely different mission, but for another story and another day. So my partner and I, and you'll see in the book here, Bob Walters. Bob Walters, so I'm setting conditions for you so you understand the framework. Bob was my boss. Bob was the battalion commander of this unit. I was the executive officer, so I was the number 2 person in this unit. And Bob and I sat down when COVID happened because we had time. We stopped working at that point. We had time to put this book together. And so we met with this gentleman, Paul Zanin, who is a professional author, British author, who writes about boxing. So if you want to look him up, he's a great guy to look up. a great friend of ours now, and he coached us on how to put this story together, and that's how the book became reality. And so the book is called Inside Abu Graib. It's our memoirs. It's our reality of what happened, and it might be a little different than what you saw in the news. Next please. The other way. Yeah. So what I'll talk about, and I'll try, I do this presentation quite a bit, and it's different every time. So if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to stop me. This is our time together. This is an interactive time for us to be together, and I'm happy to answer any question. And if you think it's maybe a little awkward, ask it anyway, and we'll go through it. So I'll go through. You know who I am. This is the story. I want to talk a lot about in this presentation. I'm going to talk a lot about leadership, at least from my perspective, and my lessons learned. And then I'll tie it in the backdrop. Will be the backdrop of Abu Graib, and of course what was going on at this prison. Next slide, please. Okay, Abu Graib. Abu Graib was a prison built in the 50s, I think the 1950s or so. It was an established prison. It was the prison that Saddam Hussein used to imprison political prisoners, anyone that was against his regime, and it was also the execution prison. It was also the torture prison. It was everything that you could imagine that was bad on this planet was in this facility. In fact, I tell people all the time, I've never been in a worse place on this earth than this facility right here. And when I'll give you a little story of how we got here, but it hasn't, I don't know if it's scarred me for life, but it's actually left a really large imprint on me from having to go to this place called Abu Graib. So I told you earlier, our unit at the time in 2003, we were north of Baghdad in a place called Balad. It's an airfield. And in October, in an evening of October, I was in what we call the command center, or the tactical operations center of the battalion. And I was just up one night talking to some of the folks that were in the command center. And the phone, the tactical field phone on the desk rang, and I picked it up. I shouldn't have probably picked it up, but I did. And it was a friend of mine in Baghdad who said, "Hey Bill, this is Mickey. Have you ever heard of Abu Graib?" And I said, "Nope, never heard of it." And he said, "Do you know where it is on the map?" And I said, "No, I don't know where it is on the map." He said, "Take a look at it." So I went and found it on the map, and I'm like, that's a bad neighborhood. Well, I don't really want to go to this place. But it was really where Abu Graib is at, if you know. It's west of Baghdad in what's called the Sunni Triangle, and it's near Fallujah and Ramadi on the highway going into Ramadi and Fallujah. And there are two main roads. One goes directly into Fallujah, and one circles north of Fallujah and drops into Ramadi. So that should give you a sort of a sense of the geography of where Abu Graib is at. So we get this call. We call this call is by the unit today, still today by everyone, is Black Wednesday, because it's the day we were told to move the unit to Abu Graib. And we had no time to do it. So 12 hours later, we were on a combat patrol from Balad down to Abu Graib to go see what we were walking into. And we got down there, and that's where our story starts. This is the prison. You can go online. I got this picture off the internet, and I printed it off. And this was a depiction of the prison. All this written in this handwriting, that's my handwriting. This is really what Abu Graib looked like. So I took this map and I turned it into the reality so you could see how this was actually laid out. By geography, this is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. So it's small. It's a small prison. And we were mortared and rocketed and attacked 2 to 3 times a day without any failure, because it was so easy of a target to do that. Now, I'll set some stage here. Our unit was 400 people. The detainees on this prison or in this installation was 4,000 on a 1 by 1 And we called it a forward operating base, FOB, but a 1 by 1 kilometer. So I think you can picture or imagine what that might look like, especially with the compaction of people, right? And so, by the way, the detainees are in all of these areas here, and they're in some of the hard buildings, the prison areas, and we are centered right here in the middle. This is where we're at. These other areas are called living or life support areas, where our soldiers that worked for us, where they lived. We put all of the soldiers into hard standing buildings with roofs. The prisoners were in tents. Now, you may think about that. I just told you we were getting attacked 2 to 3 times a day. Mortars, artillery, RPGs, small arms fire. So who's most vulnerable in this instance was, at the time, the detainees. And we tried to get that message out to the community around us that the detainees are here in tents. So people were getting killed pretty quickly in this place. So we got down there in November of 03, and this was after now the time period of what you all saw in the news from the detainee abuse and the things that were happening at that time. So we were coming in, and some of you will appreciate this, I know Nick will. Our mission order was to fix it. So that is not a mission order in the military. Normally in the military, you're given task and purpose for what you're going to do. So when I was on the phone with my friend Mickey from Baghdad, I said, Mickey, fix it's not a mission. What's the mission? He said, Bill, I don't have time. Move the unit to Abu Ghraib and fix it. So the premise of this book is about fixing Abu Ghraib. And our mission was not the detainee mission. So we had nothing to do with the detainees from an interrogation perspective or from caring for the detainees. Our job was to provide security and then to extend this security from this prison out about 20 kilometers is really what we tried to do in a radius, right? So we were setting conditions and standards, but we were also implementing what was lacking here, which was discipline, accountability, and responsibility. So our job was to fix this, okay? So I hope that gives you an appreciation of really Abu Ghraib, but some of the things that are harrowing here is there was a lot of waste material that came out from the ground from over the years, medical waste, all kinds of different things that were really hazardous to us just being here. Not to mention that the gallows and all of those things were still here, right? They weren't torn down, they weren't destroyed. Now, Abu Ghraib, I'm told, I left in 2004, in April of 2004. I put it in my rearview mirror as my driver and I were leaving, and I got a quick story on that. But I'm told this was demolished in 2014. So someone that may know could correct me, but I think it's 2014. I had, and some of the folks in the room may remember the cameras. They were old box cameras. You could buy them at Walgreens. They came in a box, and then you would turn the box in to get the film developed. Remember those? Anyone remember those? Yeah? Okay. Well, I had one of those, and I took pictures of this. I chronicled pictures of Abu Ghraib for the entire, we were there for 7 months. For 7 months. The day that we were driving out in April of 04, I took that camera and a couple other cameras, and I put it under the wheel of the Humvee, the Jeep, the truck, and we ran it over and I left it there. I just couldn't bring it back. I couldn't bring the pictures back. They were that bad. And so I left them on the ground there in Abu Ghraib. Okay. Any questions about laying the landscape? Yes, sir.
When it was used previously, the prisoners there under Saddam, what happened to them? Were they released when the U.S. took over, or were the prisoners still there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, the question was, were there detainees in Abu Ghraib, or were there prisoners in Abu Ghraib when we took over, right? So when we got there, it was a U.S. detainee facility. So there were no Iraqi prisoners there when it was actually occupied. And then it was filled, and I used to say, which was interesting, we used to have a helicopter land at Abu Ghraib about every 15 minutes. And that helicopter were special forces and regular army units in the battle space there, bringing detainees to Abu Ghraib and dropping them off. And if you can imagine a helicopter coming in about every 15, 20 minutes, and 2 or 3 detainees are getting put off the helicopter and put into the facility, that was a real monumental event. Now, what I will tell you is when we wrote this book, we did not write this book to disparage anyone. We did not make any critical comments about the unit that was there. That was not our mission. Our job was to tell the story of Abu Ghraib from our perspective. There are a lot of books written out there about how bad the unit was or how things function and it wasn't proper, and we needed to fix that as a government, as a force. But that was not what we were doing. And so I'll leave it at that. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah.
The prison was used by Saddam. I was there in 96, 98. The prison was used by Saddam against his opposition. So it had a lot of Shia in there.
Yeah.
It had a bad reputation to begin with. We used to drive by it a number of times. And in the UN. But it was wrong for the U.S. to use the same facility as our prison, because all that did was, I talked to the Iraqis on the street, and they're going, you guys are just replacing Saddam.
Right.
Which
Right.
then we all become a lot of Shia and Sunnis in there, and it was just a mess.
So I don't know if you could hear what he was saying, but in the 90s, 96 to 98, is that right? He had been in this part of the country, and that prison, Abu Ghraib, was used by Saddam Hussein for his political prisoners, right? His political opposition. And basically the perception, and I'll get to this in my conversation, especially for younger people in the audience, is perception is 90% of reality. So if you're a leader, you need to understand, and this will get into the leadership portion, but if you're perceived in a certain way, just remember, if you're leading that organization, that perception is reality. So what he was talking about is that we were perceived as just replacing Saddam Hussein by running our detainees into this prison facility. Now what happened was, because of this, in 2004 when I was there, we ended up building Fabuka in the south of Iraq, where that became the largest detainee facility. It was named after Ron Buka, a firefighter who was killed in the 9/11 attack, and he was rushing into a building, I believe, and he has history, so we named the FOB after him. He was also a warrant officer in the Army. So am I projecting okay? Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. So this perception we had was horrific, right? So and now we're operating it as a prison. I'll tell you a great little story to the side here. There were 3 Iraqi contractors that worked for us, our units. So we hired a Sunni, a Shia, and a Kurd to work with us. And I would always talk to them. Mohammed was the Sunni, and Ammar was the Shia gentleman, and then the Kurd was a young guy, I can't remember his name. But I would always get them together and say, I thought you guys didn't like each other. And because that's what we're told, that they didn't care. They said, hey, as long as you're paying us, we'll work for you, and we'll like each other. And so we had these guys following us around the battlefield, and you made me think of the story just now, but Mohammed, who was he was probably in his 50s at this time, he was an older gentleman. He had been a prisoner in Abu Ghraib for 10 years under Saddam Hussein. And when we told him we were moving from Balad to Abu Ghraib, he just looked at me and shook his head. He's like, I just got out of there. He had just been released years earlier. So he had been physically a detainee or a prisoner in this prison, and then he was working for us. So it was, the sad part of that story is we left country in 2004, in April 2004, and he was killed about 3 weeks later. He was driving up to a checkpoint, driving too fast, and he was killed at that checkpoint. So it was, and we had told Mohammed before we left not to drive fast, and not to, especially as units were transitioning in and out. New units coming in at this time in 2004 didn't know the area of operation. right? They didn't understand the environment. So they were going to be a little bit more antsy at that time, and you might understand the psychology behind that, Mr. Cohen. So, but we had been there for a year, so our sensitivities had changed a lot from the time we got there until this time. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to get in now, and this is really, and you know, I'm in a room of people that are leaders. I can already sense that, so I don't want to tell you things you know. But for the younger people, I ask that from tonight, if you can walk away with 1 or 2 or 3 things that I can imprint on you as you go into your roles in life and you lead in organizations that you're going to go to, just make some notes and let me know if that's helpful. But this is over 35 years of experience that I'm talking from.
I'm sorry, can I ask one more question on your map that you have?
Yeah, can we go back one?
Because not all the detainees were in tents. There were 2 wings
Yeah,
that were cells.
right here.
Yeah, 1A and 1B.
1A, 1B. Yeah, this was the only hard stands. So what you had here, what he's talking about is this was mostly tent. This is where the population was for detainees. But there were some hard buildings here that were used for detainees as well.
And those got hit by mortars too.
All the time. I mean, our roofs were coming in on us all the time. And I've got a funny story I want to share with you on that towards the end. So go ahead.
I had a detainee there that I was responsible for putting them in.
Right.
So I was trying to get them out. Right when you were there.
Really?
Oh yeah.
See, we shared the same dirt, and we didn't even know it. So that's good. That's great. No, thanks, and thanks. No, you're doing great. I love it because it makes me. You made me remember the story about Muhammad. Thank you. I tell someone every time. I do this so often that my story changes. I mean, I present it differently every time, but it's still the same facts. All right. This is me later in life in 2010 in southern Iraq. I just put the picture in there because these guys were just 2 great guys. I really loved being with them. This was at Abu Ghraib. We had painted our unit logo on one of the textile buildings. See, the prison was used for textile manufacturing when Saddam Hussein had it. And so this was the Sergeant Major of our unit, Sergeant Major Sherwood Brame. Fantastic guy. He and I rode down together from Balad to Abu Ghraib the first day we walked in there, and I thought he was literally going to lose his mind. And I had to calm him down, and I said, Sergeant Major, I got to get out. I got to get away from you because he was going into discipline, standards, and accountability the second we walked. We rode into that entry control point. And then this is Sergeant First Class Bob Wells. We called him the mayor because he kept us. He built our living facilities. He kept us sustained. He made life livable for us. And so Bob Wells, a great guy, Ranger from the Ranger Regiment. He loved being called the mayor. He liked the mayor title, so we left it with him. This was our unit in 2004. This is just a sampling of the unit, but that was on a bunker in Balad. And the point about this slide is, no matter what you do in life as a leader, leading is about people. Leading is always about people. One of the things I think the Marine Corps says, Dollar Bill, got you back there, says is, in one of their tactical manuals is, and this is the Marine Corps, you manage things, but you lead people. And so for the young folks here, just never forget that. You're always interacting with people, and it's super important to understand that. And some people miss it when they lead. And Nick and I were talking about it earlier. Next slide, please. 2 more things here that are super important points that I like to stomp my foot on, and this again is about leadership. By the way, this is the gallows at Abu Ghraib. This is actually the floor drop of one of the, and this is where people were actually hung. So this is Abu Ghraib. But when I was there at the time, you can see, well, you can't see. That's actually me. This is the lever, but I was holding that box camera in my hand. And if you see the book or you get a copy of the book, you'll see that picture where I'm holding that box camera that I ran over. I didn't bring it back. But we did bring these pictures back just because we wanted to share what this looked like. Leadership. I've been BIN, into 2 categories, challenge and crisis. And I learned this over years, but 99% of what we deal with in life, and older people I think will agree with me, is a challenge. There's only that 1% or that less than 1% that's a crisis. And for me, I categorize that crisis, and you'll have to do the same for yourself. What is a crisis to you, defined? But for me, it's always been life, limb, or eyesight. That's a crisis. That's something we really need to react to. Everything else falls into the challenge category. And I'll tell you why. As a young officer, everything was a crisis for me. As an older or more senior officer, as a colonel, more things were challenges. And when people would come to me, you can actually alleviate personal stress and unit stress by binning your problems into challenge and crisis. So if you're thinking about this as a leader or a young leader, if you can lower the stress of your organization by making these types of decisions, these types of reactions, it's going to be good for your organization or your unit. And this does not apply specifically to the military. I've been in private sector now for the last 5 years, and this is absolutely appropriate for private sector as well. I did not go back to government work. I work purely in the private sector now. The last thing on this slide is, a lot of times we tend to listen to respond when we should be listening to learn, right? We should be listening to learn what people are saying and not really thinking about what we're going to respond, because there's so much we miss. And as a leader, and I've made this mistake in my life many times, I'm too quick to make that decision or to come back with that response when I truly didn't hear what was being said. So think about that. Another little nugget there of information, things that I've learned, a lesson learned. And by the way, and Nick taught me this a long time ago, I'm an expert in nothing, but I have a lot of experience. So I'll never claim that. I'll never claim to be an expert. But two things that I think you can walk away with. Next slide. Okay, I want to walk you through, and this is a good scenario here of any problem you come across. If you're in your own private work environment and you get tasked to do something, or you get a job that you're supposed to do, or a project, you can walk, basically what we did was we walked it from the time we got that phone call in October and how we got ourselves to a routine at the end. And what you're trying to do in these types of austere environments, and these type of environments that are really, really hard to live in and to exist in, you've got to get into a routine. And routines are really good as long as you're still keeping your awareness up, right? You've got to still be aware of the dangers, at least in this environment. But in private sector, in the jobs that I do now, I'm a security consultant. I still go through this process of taking the first call from the client and working it into a project deliverable at the end, where I'm delivering routine, or I'm delivering something to that client. So similar in any type of life. But what we did was we got the call. First thing we did was we tried to identify the problem. So we did a leader's reconnaissance. That's the day I drove down 12 hours later to Abu Graib, and we went physically there to see what we were in for. And believe me, it was horrific. We could not believe what we were walking into. Then we went back, and this is a great part of the story. And I give this young captain that worked for me at the time, his name's Romeo Qureshi. He's in the book. You can read about him. He was the logistics officer for the unit. He was what we call the S4. He ran the logistics for our unit. He was about 28, 29 years old. He was a young guy. And I took him with me on the leader's reconnaissance down to Abu Graib that day. We got down there. We stayed down there for about 12 hours. I pulled him aside and I said, "You're staying here." And I left him there. I said, I'll be back in 4 days. I want this place up and running, ready for us to go. And he smoked a lot of cigarettes, and he said he'll get it done. So then he did. And when I got back 4 days later with 400 people, the Abu Graib that I showed you in that picture, our headquarters was set up and ready to go. Now, he had a lot of help from Mohammed, and he had a lot of help from Ammar, and the Iraqi contractors and the Kurd. I can't remember his name, but he was a young guy. He was about 18 years old, who helped us. But Romeo Qureshi had this ready for us to go, and I give him a lot of credit in the book when we wrote the book about doing that, because what his task to do was monumental. There was no infrastructure. There was no bathrooms. There was no running water. There was no livable place to go. So he had to kind of shape that for us. So that's what happens in the preparation to move. Then we got down there, and he was really happy we were there because he had been by himself for about 4 or 5 days. So when we got down there, it made him feel good. And then we started from the very beginning. We started running military operations. And if you equate this to private sector, this is where you start doing your project work. You start running your business, right? And then you get into, at least in the military, this is really important, what was lacking at Abu Ghraib and what you've all heard about was simply discipline, standards, and accountability. What that unit did was not a representation of us as a military. It was not. It was one isolated unit, in our opinion, and frankly, when we got there the day on the leader's recon, I met the guy that was in charge, and I was sorry. I felt sorry for him because it had gotten out of control, and this strategic blunder was globally now, because of communications, quickly had gone across the planet, right? So everyone knew about it. Then we went into operations, and then we went into routine. So this was sort of the cycle. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. So I talk a little bit about small unit leadership to lieutenants and staff sergeants and people like that. And what I've said over the years, I was in Iraq at the same time, not at the same place, is that for your predecessor's unit, that a staff sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain could have stopped and said, this isn't what we're about.
Right.
We need to elevate this now and stop the strategic blunder that you mentioned earlier in the talk.
Right.
Have I been right or have I been wrong?
Absolutely right.
To say that a small unit leader can have that impact on an organization if they want to.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what we found out, and it's a great point, and I think really the Special Forces does this really well in the SF community. In the regular Army, when we're decentralizing basically you centrally plan, and you decentralize execution. That's normally how it works. And that was a breakdown in that organization. They didn't have that strong NCO leadership that should have said, this needs to stop, right? And that's the lessons we do need to teach the current force, right? We do need to reinforce those lessons. So absolutely, 100% agree. Yeah. So Sergeant Major Graib retired. Probably, he was a little older than I am, so I think he probably retired. So she asked me about Sergeant Major Graib, who I introduced, and then Romeo Qureshi. So he retired, and Romeo retired as a lieutenant colonel. He married the love of his life, a German lady he met in our tour in 2003, and they have 3 children, and they live in outside of Frankfurt. So and I actually talk to him all the time on WhatsApp. So I do communicate with him. But yeah, he's still doing it. Well, I think so Denny's making a great point. The other part about leadership, I think the point we're trying to make here is I'm still in contact with the people from this organization, which was almost 20 years ago. And so again, leadership, if you're doing things right, it's going to promulgate over time. And just like you said, Brian, we've got to inculcate that mindset into our junior leaders for sure. I think the Army tries to do a really great. The Army's big, right? The Army's massive, and it's made up of components: active, reserve, and guard. And so we have different components we're also dealing with. So it's not, as Bill's a Marine Corps veteran. The Marine Corps is pretty small. It's a little easier to get that message. Army's big, so we gotta do that. Do you have something? Good. Yep. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is a good picture here of the prison yard. This is Abu Ghraib in 2003. This is where the prisoners were living. You can see this is the tents they were living in. At this time right now, they are drying their laundry. So they had done laundry and they were drying it. It was during the summer. This is a food truck where we would bring in the folks that were running the detainee operations would bring the food in, and these are the food canisters. They would normally get a meal of potatoes and some sort of meat. and maybe a starch or something. But they would come over, they would line up for their meals, and then this was what we were able to bring in, which was porta potties. And so bathrooms were not existent here, so we had to actually establish that infrastructure. And if you can imagine, that's not a very sanitary thing to walk into. So we got that going here. Some of the things I like to talk about from this specific example are understand your environment, number one. That goes in private sector as well. Understand your business, understand your business culture, right? Not everyone here is going to be in the military or do a military service, but it all is applicable as you transition over. I talk about people, learning individual strengths and weaknesses. I think that goes back to Brian's point. If we know the folks that are working with us, what they're good at doing and what they need help learning how to do, it's easy for us to lead. It's easy for us to put people in a position where they can be successful. And that's another important part about leading, is finding those strengths and putting people in the right jobs. Here we had to understand our risk. The risk was very high here, so we had to understand that. And then we had to mitigate. And so this right here is form our team, train our team, empower our team. Nick and I talked about this earlier. Execute the mission and continuously reevaluate. And that's no different than anything you would do in a private job as well. You're talking about, is my team functioning properly? Are we actually doing the things we need to do? And it should be a constant cycle, a constant conversation. Last note here. Anyone ever read a book by John Cotter called Leading Change? If you haven't, you might want to pick it up. I have it tabbed out. It sits in my office. It's called Leading Change by John Cotter. He talks about organizational blockers and saboteurs. If you're walking into a leadership position, you need to realize there's someone in that organization that does not want you to succeed. And that's reality. And I've seen it in the military and I've seen it in private sector. So a leader's job is to identify the organizational blockers and saboteurs inside that unit or organization. And the reason that is and I'm not a psychologist, but I think this is pretty much human nature in some respects, but it's something that always happens.
Can I ask you a question? The military police units that were there from New York, how much pushback did you get from them over taking over? I mean, did they stand your way? Did they hurt you? Did they try to undermine you?
So the question is, when we got to Abu Ghraib in that November day of 2003, the military police units that were actually on Abu Ghraib, how did they feel about us coming there? Is that right? They didn't have a choice. So they were told to move. They were told to leave. So when
Did they actually leave the facility, or did you have to still deal with it?
we changed out the entire unit, they left Abu Ghraib. Now where they went, I couldn't tell you. They probably went to Baghdad, but when we got there, we took over the entire FOB from a security and safety perspective, and then mission oriented as well.
Because that could be a problem when you try and move into an area that somebody already has, and even if you have authority, they will fight you.
True.
You cannot move them physically out of the way and
Yeah.
take over. They will still come under you.
This time period was so volatile that they did not have they didn't have a choice, so they left. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead. Next slide. Okay, two things I think are kind of funny. I always put it in this presentation. What's really, if you're in a leadership role or you do anything about leadership, you lead exactly. If someone tells you this is always the way we've done it, your senses should go off right away. That means that there is some problem with change there. There's some problem with creativity, some problem with innovation, possibly. But anytime someone says to me, this is the way we've always done it, we're not going to change, immediately I go into change mode. So I think it's something that if you're a young person and you're thinking about leading, always be wary of that. And this one's always funny because this is a person that you just have to harness that energy. You have to harness that energy. And this is someone you always want, if you say in the military, at least in Iraq in these times, we need to get through that door. Okay, hold my water. At that time we weren't allowed to drink beer. But hold my beer, I'll take care of it, I'll go knock that door down. Well, there's no difference here, but you got to watch for this type of person as well, but you got to harness that energy and direct them in the right way. And so again, another leadership challenge, but these two things I think you'll probably come across in your life if you go on to lead organizations or you've led organizations in the past. If you haven't seen this, I'd be surprised, but I've seen it many times. And sometimes this is a good problem to have right here. So I would always leverage that if I needed that. This one right here I was always weary about. Next slide. Okay, I talked about how's my time, Tracy? Am I okay? A couple minutes. Yeah, a couple minutes. So, lessons learned. If you're going to lead an organization, you should articulate clear guidance. So you cannot tell people just to go fix something. You cannot tell people just go do it. I don't want to be bothered with the details. You can't do that. You've got to be clear about task and purpose. What is the task and what is the purpose? I think it'll fall in with junior leadership and developing our junior leaders. They have to understand what they're doing and what they're getting into. I think that's really important. As a leader, this was a lesson I was taught by General Casey. You may remember General Casey. He commanded Iraq at one time. He's a 4-star retired general. But when I was at Fort Leavenworth, Dana and I were going through the command course. He told me one time, he said, Bill, you gotta eat properly. You've got to get sleep, you've got to physically exercise, and you've got to read for pleasure. And some of these things are missed on people when you're in leadership roles. A lot of times we want to be the person that stays up all night, or we want to stay up for multiple days, or we want to be there all the time. Every time you do that, you become more ineffective as a leader. So this is a great lesson learned. In our leadership roles in 2003, we were burning ourselves in. We were going for days without sleeping, we were going for days without eating properly, and it was not a good recipe for making decisions. And so what we did later, and this is a 2010 picture of me, I was in Basra at this time, I was on a Black Hawk in Basra. We were teaching our leaders to do these things, to get the proper rest, to eat, to sleep, and to read for pleasure. Because reading email is not reading for pleasure, or reading a operations order is not reading for pleasure. Also, we put a lot of focus in our lessons learned on honoring those that were with us, that worked for us. Specialist Timothy Carroll was killed on the Iranian border during this mission. We never forgot that he was a part of our unit, and we still to this day honor him. His name is in the Capitol building. When we were on Abu Ghraib, we built a range. A range is a firing range, so we could stay proficient. We built a small arms range, rifles, pistols, because we still had to practice while we were there. We were still training. We're always training, even though we were there. We built the range and named it Carroll Range. And so when we transitioned Abu Ghraib to a different unit, they kept the range. So that was something we tried to do. My story I wanted to tell you about The Last Samurai. Do I have a minute? I have a minute? Yeah. December of 03, everyone remember the movie with Tom Cruise? The Last Samurai. This is a movie Tom Cruise did. I don't know, if you haven't seen it, you might see it. It's good. It's pretty good. We could buy movies off the Iraqi population for like $1. They were black market movies. They would buy them in like Bangladesh. Some guy would be filming it in the back, and they would make a movie, and then they'd bring it to Iraq and sell it to us. So I was coming in from a patrol, and when we came in from patrols, especially in this part of Iraq, we got out of the vehicles and walked along the vehicles because we were worried about grenades and other things running up to our trucks, just the things that were happening to us at the time. And this Iraqi boy ran up to my truck, and everyone went into combat mode to stop because they thought it was a suicide vest or they didn't know what it was. And he was trying to sell a movie to us. Well, the movie he sold, so he didn't get hurt. We were okay. But remember, we had been there over a year, almost a year at this point. So our sensitivities were different. The unit that had come in after us might have shot him, right? They might have shot him because it was a different environment. Anyway, he sold us Last Samurai. So we were excited. We had not seen any type of TV. We had not talked to our families for a year. I talked to my wife one time in that entire time. And that was because I was in an incident that needed to be reported back to her because she needed to know I was okay. And so I take the movie into the unit in that part of Abu Ghraib where we were at, and I grabbed the communications officer, he's a young captain, and I said, "You got to fire this movie up and invite everyone in tonight. We're going to play it on one of these things off our laptop, and we're going to sit in here and we're going to enjoy some popcorn. We had gotten some popcorn shipped in, and so we were going to have popcorn and a movie. So we get everyone from that part of the unit into this little room inside that textile factory that I described, and we start watching La Last Samurai. We get in for 10 minutes, and we get hit with 90 120 millimeter mortars in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. It completely destroys the building we're in. Everyone's on the ground. The projector's thrown everywhere. We have wounded people all over the fob. Detainees have been wounded. It was what we call in the military a bad day. And we go into this, what we call our battle drill at the time, of casualty evacuation, getting people to the hospitals, calling in the helicopters. It was a lot of things were happening. And plus, this was at about 10 o'clock at night. Okay, so we're doing all this at night. So after everything calmed down about 2 in the morning, I got the communications officer and I said, his name was Tony. I said, Tony, fire up Last Samurai. Let's go. So we bring everyone back into this room. We put the movie back in, and I went to go get a bottle of water, and I came back, and everyone was sitting in the room in their helmets and their flak vests. And then we watched the movie in our helmets and flak vests. Now, we did not have body armor, by the way. We had the 1960 flak vest that we took to Vietnam. That's what we were basically wearing at the time, because the technology had not caught up with us yet on what you would see later for body armor. So that's the Last Samurai story. We actually watched the movie. We watched it till, 3 or 3:30, and then we went to bed. But at that point, we had taken care of everyone that had been hurt. Innovative and creative leadership. One of the things I like to talk about for folks that are interested is that you've got to underwrite mistakes. As a leader, people will make mistakes. You've got to underwrite those mistakes. And that will build a better team. And then we had some bumper stickers that we said, Vanny. We called a person, if you got the title Vanny, value added, no issue, that means you're a great soldier. We'd say, hey, that person's a Vanny, got Vanny, value added, no issue. And then the other one was basically what we were telling the MPs that were there was cooperate and graduate, you got to go. And so that's just some bumper stickers. And you can come up with your own, right, in your organizations of business. Next slide. Real quick on the families, I do want to touch on this. This is my partner, Bob Walters. He retired as a Major General a couple of years ago. He was a commander at Fort Huachuca when he retired. He did talk about Abu Ghraib in his retirement speech. I was there. It was fantastic. This is my wife, Dana. We were much younger then. And then this is my family. One of the most important parts about being in the military and even in your private sector work is your support system and your family, whatever that is. However you define it, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's what you solidify around to give you strength as a leader in whatever you're doing. But this was our strength. These are some of the things that are super, I laugh about them sometimes, but my daughter here, Elise, she told everyone that I was lost. So during this time period in 2003, she was little, she was 3 years old, but she thought her dad was lost. He went to the airport and he got lost, and he didn't come back for a year. And so that was one of the things she did. A friend of mine, I'll just go quickly to the bottom. By the way, in the book, if you haven't read it or you are interested, there's a very serious medical section in this book with Bob Walters' daughter that she had an experience in Germany. You should read that section of it. It's pretty eye-opening about how the Germans treated us during this time period as Americans living in Germany. But lastly, we had a friend in our stairwell where we lived in Germany. He was in Iraq with me at the same time in a different part. But when he got home, see, we were so used to driving fast everywhere. If you probably remember this, driving fast and trying to drive in the middle of the road, because we thought that was going to protect us from an IED. In fact, it only just made us feel better, because it would have never protected us. He got home to Germany and he was going on Rhein-Main Air Base and he was going in the wrong way, and his wife was telling him, Barry, you're driving the wrong way on this road. And he said, I don't care, I just got back from Iraq. I'm going to go this way. So we always laugh about this. He was a friend of ours. But that was the mentality as people were coming back, because remember, this was the first year that we had gone to combat let's not think about Afghanistan. Afghanistan happened before, but this was truly when the Army deployed to combat. And so people were coming back, In fact, we had several soldiers in our unit when we got back got killed on motorcycles or got really injured in fights and things of that nature because their level of energy, I guess, or their intensiveness was here, but we were going back to civilized communities and civilized world. So these things were always on our minds, and it was sad. It was sad a lot of times. Next slide. I'll go through this. Just want to show you here, if you haven't read this book, it's a really good book. It's called Your Oxygen Mask First. I recommend it. It's a super easy read. And then one thing I want to make here, point here is, you know, we often tell everyone, and I have a quote I want to end on with Cole and Powell, but you got to work hard, you got to work hard, you got to work hard, but really, you got to do all these things in order to lead and be successful. So, and if you want a copy of this, you know, we can get it out to anyone. So, next slide. This is super important. As a leader, you got to empower the how. All right. We can talk about that offline. Keep going. I do have a comment about esprit de corps and morale. I'm no believer in morale. I don't believe in morale. I do from an individual perspective. Morale happens every day. It happens to us every minute. If we walk out of this building and trip on the steps out here, our morale's going to change. But what really holds a unit together and builds people is esprit de corps. Esprit de corps is really important. Esprit de corps will raise your morale. So that's something I talk about. I wrote an article for Forbes on this. It's out there on LinkedIn if you care to look at it. Next slide. Band of Brothers thing. Next slide. Memories. This is Bob and I last year down at Fort Carson, or 2 years ago. We linked up for lunch at the Qdoba. That was good. I hadn't seen him in a long time. He's retired now. This is pictures of Abu Ghraib in our unit. That was when we were going home. We were in Kuwait. And this, by the way, I got to find, that's Romeo Qureshi right down there. Romeo Qureshi, the guy I talked about. Next slide. I did a podcast on this book. It's through RAIN. Next slide. Some articles I've published on leadership in Forbes. Next slide. Final thought. I really like this. We talk about varying that circle of hard. It's not all hard work. It is hard work, but it's also about preparation and learning from failure. What we have to do as leaders is underwrite that failure. We have to support people that work for us, and we have to learn from those mistakes we make. And the older people in the room will understand that. We've all learned from our mistakes. That's how we get better. That's it. I'll close there. Hopefully that wasn't too fast a fan. Sorry, but we had to get through it.